Hey UX UI community. In this one I'm going to show you one of my favorite tools in Adobe XD, the Repeat Grid. This is what we're going to be building. And I'm going to show you two different methods for being able to quickly and easily populate all of this data in a realistic fashion. I'm also going to do a sample table and again show you how to populate this with realistic looking content quickly and easily. Let's go ahead and jump on in here. Select your artboard tool. I'm actually down here using this Instagram post size just in case I decide to try to promote these on any of my Instagram feeds. But you can do this at whatever size you see fit, obviously. Go ahead and name these Repeat Grid 1, Repeat Grid 2. Doesn't really matter. You can name these whatever you want. I just try to keep myself in practice of naming things even when I'm doing these videos where the naming doesn't really matter so much. But when you're building out large files for for real work at the office with your teams, it's, it starts to get pretty important that you name things, especially if you're building out a design system or something like that. You want people to be able to search on certain things or to be able to find things easily. So I just try to keep myself in the habit of naming. So we'll go ahead and turn on our grid. I'm going to go over here. I'm not going to talk too much about grids in this, but basically I've already got a grid set up on these two that I built out just for a sample. And I'm just going to say make this default. And then I'm going to go over here and say use default so that way it's got my grid structure in here. We'll go ahead and start with this sample contact list. So if you grab your circle tool, come in here and hold shift to constrain it to a square or to a circle instead of a ellipse. It doesn't really matter what this looks like. I just like to try to get in the habit of turning borders off if I'm not using borders for anything, but it doesn't really matter what the style of this is. It's going to get replaced anyway. This is just our placeholder or our sort of dummy row. And then we'll do a similar thing with the type as well. We'll just place in some dummy type here. I'm not going to fiddle too much with the design on this because the important part of this is just that you get an understanding for how Repeat Grid works and again how to populate it with realistic looking content relatively easily. So I'm not going to noodle on the design too much. We're just going to kind of throw some stuff in here. Now one important thing to note is that now when I'm typing in this sample address, I probably want to go ahead and change the styling of this and get the styling in place. You can change it after the fact as well, so it doesn't have to be styled before you populate the content. But one important thing to note is you might want to think about how long the content's probably going to be, and so I'll usually kind of change the text field type here so that I can draw this out to a specific size. You know, I can draw it out based on my grid and allow the content to be able to be flexible in there. If I were to make this too short and then we populate it with some random content or whatever, it's, you know, we won't know how long it's going to be and it might clip it. So it's just something you want to think about when you're creating your dummy content potentially as well. And like I said, just for the sake of making this quick and easy on us, we're not going to overthink this too much. So now we've got a good sort of dummy template here that's all set up and ready to go. I forgot that I left one column over there on the other side, so I'm just leaving that same column here so that this appears centered. So now you can grab all of this placeholder content that you made and you can group it, or you know, you can even use components here. We could turn it into a component or group it. In this particular instance, I'm not going to worry about doing that. There's nothing really special that's going to happen, you know, that's going to go on here that would require that sort of level of detail. So in this particular instance, I'm just going to leave this as is and then just go over here and select your repeater grid. And once you click that, you'll see these scrubber handles appear. And a repeat grid can repeat either direction. In our particular case, we're only going to be repeating this. We're only going to be repeating this vertically. And drag this out, no matter what size of an artboard you're on, go ahead and drag this out a ways because, well, actually, you know what? It doesn't really matter. You can drag it out to whatever size you want. Let's just call it some random size, or, you know, whatever. And then you can space this out to, you know, some size that makes it feel about right. I'm going to show you, I'm gonna leave this a little short because I'm going to show you one other benefit or trick to populating this content yourself as opposed to doing it with the plugin that I'm going to share with you. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this over just for the sake of getting through this real quick. All right, let's go ahead and build out our sample table template as well, and then we'll talk about how to populate these things with content rather than going in here and typing in each one individually. You can do that, but you know, that's time consuming and it sucks, especially depending on the size of your table and how much content you have in it. So I'm going to show you two different better solutions for how to populate that once we get there. But for the time being, let's go ahead and just build out our dummy table scenario as well real quick. So we're going to select our rectangle tool. And again, I'll turn my grid back on just, you know, for the sake of trying to keep myself in force of habit and doing things appropriately on grids and what have you. Again, I'm going to turn the border off. You know, just try to keep everything nice and okay. Then I'm just going to duplicate this for the row fill. And again, I'm going to cheat a little bit here just for the sake of getting through this quickly for you guys. Okay, now we can turn our background grid back off. Select your type tool. And then I'm going to show you just one other thing. One of the things I like to do with Repeat Grid is oftentimes I find other uses for it besides just creating tables or just creating grids. Sometimes I find other creative ways to use it. And so I just wanted to kind of give you this as food for thought. Like, think of other ways you could potentially use it. Like right now I just want to create, you know, an actions menu icon. So I'll go ahead and select the repeater grid on this little dot, draw this out, and close up this gap. And so now I've used a repeater grid in a little bit more of an unusual fashion, where I've used it to just create an icon. I do that kind of thing with Repeater Grid all the time. I use it for just shortcutting, you know, icon creation, or if I need a pattern of some sort to, you know, for a background image or something like that. I find all kinds of other creative ways to use Repeater Grid. It doesn't always have to be used for making a table. So again, just some food for thought there on trying to think about more creative ways to potentially use it. So in this particular case, I'm just creating, you know, this could be like a health status indicator, or, you know, whatever you want this to be, or any other type of, maybe you've got some little mini data viz in here, right? Like a little line chart or something in here. So I just wanted to show one way of kind of, one other thing that's of note here is that if you plan on doing anything with the color of this element, if you do not make this a component, you won't be able to do an override on it. And what will happen is if we change the color of this, once we've done the repeater grid on it, if we change the color of this, it will change the color on every repeated row or every repeated column, or everywhere that you've used the repeater grid, they will all become the same color. So the trick for getting around that is that you just make this a component. And once you make this a component, then you'll be able to click into each one and do an override on it if you need to change the color. You don't have to make it a component before you use the repeater grid. You can use the repeater grid and you can go back into the main row and make it a component later, but we're just going to do it now so that I can show you what I'm talking about here. And let's just go ahead and, for the sake of speeding up the process, let's just go ahead and make this one green to start with. And then again, I'm just going to come over here and cheat a little bit just to speed this process up, because I didn't really remember exactly what size I made this text when I built that sample. But this can be whatever now. Let's just go ahead and dummy all this text out. And again, you'll notice that I drew these text fields out to be as long as I knew they would need to be to contain the content that I'm going to load into these. And again, you can always go back, change styling and whatever. So again, let's just grab this, hit your repeat grid, and again, just draw it out to some length. Doesn't matter. However many you want to make in your mockup. Then let's change the spacing. Okay, so now that we have this created, let me go ahead and just draw this one out a little further, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to show you something else once we get in here. So now we've got both of these templates created. Now let's talk about the two different methods there are for populating repeater grids with content. There is a plugin. I discovered a plugin not too long ago called Repetor, and you can dig in there. It's a free plugin. You can use it for, totally for free. So if you select a repeater grid and you come over here to the Repetor plugin, you'll see up here it's got this generate content, and this is kind of your dummy layout. You can see it's matching the layout that we have. So if you wanted to, put people's pictures in here, you just select your little picture. You can see it's already highlighted. You can see when I click around here, I can highlight different elements. So if I wanted to put people's pictures in here, I could do that. I could search in here and try to find, appropriate things. Like we could go into the portrait category and we could say, go ahead and add these portraits in there. You'll see the plugin's working. And it will populate it. It'll do the same thing with text. Now, I'll tell you why I don't like using the plugin and why the plugin kind of bothers me is there's a bit of a lack of control. So now let's say I want to go in here and I want to create a name, right? So in the plugin, I'll select my name thing, and it's got names and stuff in here. It's got custom lists. You can create your own list items. This just feels a little bit cumbersome to me, and I have to do this now every time. Every single time I create one of these repeat grids, if I use this plugin, I have to go in. Like I don't know that there's any way to sort of to create a quicker mechanism. Like each time I have to go in there and go through this like build it out process. So that's the one downside to using the plugin. I do think this is a pretty cool plugin. It's pretty, it's got a lot of, you've got a reasonable amount of control in here. But what I'm going to show you that I think is the better method for doing this is to just do it with the native built-in functionality that XD has. So all you really have to do to populate these things natively from XD is let's go ahead and minimize this, and let's go in here. What I started doing is collecting this. I've got this folder called Adobe XD Data. And so in this Adobe XD Data folder, I've started creating text lists, and these are just plain text. So you can open these up in it, whatever your favorite text editor is. I happen to like Sublime, but whatever it is, this is my full list of addresses, and I just created 50 of them. There's all kinds of websites online that will help you create dummy looking realistic addresses, phone numbers, whatever you need. There's all kinds of these randomizer lists out there that will generate addresses, names, whatever. And that's all I use to create these text lists with. Is I created them off of a bunch of these. So this one's called randomer.io. You can change, how many you want it to generate. In my case, I just selected 50 for the addresses. I went through and did a bunch of different types of addresses, so you can choose different countries, and I did a bunch because the company that I work for, we happen to be a global company, and so I wanted the addresses to represent the global community. So anyway, just another little side tip. But all you have to do is just, these things aren't comma delimited. It's each one's just put on its own row, so each one is done by a break. So once you get your lists created, and you can see what I've done is I've just created a bunch of different types of lists for different scenarios. I have cities by themselves. I have address numbers by themselves. I have company names, company website URLs, countries by themselves, emails by themselves, postal codes, you know, whatever I thought I needed. I've also gathered up images that I thought were appropriate. And what's nice about doing this is that this can be shared with your team, and then everybody can use this same thing for building out their mockups. And the other nice thing about it is these images, I just went and grabbed a bunch of free images online, and I made them square so that they would fit into a circle if I wanted them to fit into a circle nicely. Now, the other thing that's nice about this is I was able to go through and see, okay, this first image that I made is a female. So now in my names, when I come down here and I view my names list, I can put a female name there to associate a female name to a female image. And that's the other nice thing about this. This gives you a level of control where I'm not just doing it with the plugin, and it's not just random names where I might get a mix of male names with female faces, right? So this gives me a little bit more control. And then once I have this built, you know, once I've made these text lists, it's a little bit of a pain at first making each one of these text lists, but each time I make one, I just keep it in here in this folder and I can access it at any time. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this over on my other monitor off screen. And then I'm going to bring this back. So now if we want to populate this ourselves instead of trying to use that plugin, like I said, it's very simple. And here's another trick. You can see what we've got. You can see what we've got here. We've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've got 11 drawn out here in our grid. But what I like to do is I like to make sure that I always load in more than I need. So what I will do is I'll select, let's just, for the sake of this, let's go ahead and select all 50 of these just to show you what I'm talking about. And I like to go ahead, you just drag these over and you see it highlights. I just drop it on there. And this might take a second just because I used so many, but because I dropped 50 images on here, what's nice is Adobe XD knows that I've loaded 50 images in here. So now what it's going to do is if I decide I want to go in here and I want to extend my repeater grid out even further, now you can see when I extend it, it's got all those other images loaded into memory. It knows that I loaded 50 images in here, and it will not start to repeat again until we reach the end of that list of 50. So that is pretty handy and just another cool trick that I wanted to point out to you. And you can do that with everything, right? So we could do that with the addresses as well. So I've got 50, oops, I dropped it in the wrong place. So just undo that. Let's try that again. Let's see if I can drop it on the right field this time. So now it's loaded all 50 of those addresses in. And then let's grab the names. And then let's grab the emails. So you can see how easy that is and how quick. And like I said, the first time you create the list, it's a little bit of a pain, but then those lists become reusable and you can share those lists amongst your team. So now if we go over here and we jump in, let's go ahead and add the company names in. And then we'll go ahead and grab the URLs. All right, and now that we have those things done, and again, I'll go over here and just for the sake of just showing you one more time, I can draw this out now, and it sees all the ones that I loaded in here even though I didn't have the repeat grid drawn out that far. So that's the other downside to the plugin, is if I decided to change my repeat grid, I'd have to go back to the plugin and reload the new ones. The new ones would probably just get replicated from the end or whatever. But now that we have these repeater grids drawn out, I'll show also, just real quick, I'll show you how I built the scroll in. So a lot of times when I'm making tables, I like to leave the header alone, and I like to have the content scroll underneath the header. And that's a real simple thing too. Just go over here to your transform area here, and the hopefully you can see my mouse moving here, but just select this vertical scroll, and now we've added a scroll window to our table. And so, you know, I usually kind of cut off one of the bottom elements just a little bit so that people can kind of tell that it scrolls. And then I'll usually create some kind of a dummy scroll bar here too, even though it won't actually scroll in the mockup. You know, a lot of times when I'm working, I'll put some kind of a dummy scroll bar on here just so that people can get the idea that there's a scroll there. I actually didn't even do this in the other sample that I built for the purposes of this tutorial, but just something that came to mind while I was going through this here that I thought I'd show you guys. And again, here just select your grid, and then again come over here to the panel and select your vertical scroll. And again, I'll usually just, you know, kind of try to make it noticeable that it's chopped and that there's some type of a scroll happening here. And then in terms of linking these two pages like I did in the sample, if you want to do that, we'll just go into prototype mode. And then for the purposes of this demo, I just literally linked these two pages together. So if you just drag over, link the page together, we'll say transition slide left, I think is what I did on the other one. And then we'll select this page, drag it, and on the transition, I said slide right. And then I just leave the ease out there anytime I do that type of a transition. And so now if you select this, you can make it the home screen. And if you make this the home screen, you can name this flow. Then when you click play, it will pop up and you'll see we have our scroll. And like I was telling you, the scroll bar won't actually move, obviously, but you know, at least it gives whoever's previewing your prototype the idea that there is a scroll area here. And then anywhere that you click, it'll transition back over to this other guy. Oh, and I almost forgot. I was going to show you guys a couple of other things real quick here that I completely forgot about. So this online status indicator, the reason we had turned that into a component originally was because if I break this, I'm just going to go ahead and break this out of being a component real quick. Let's just ungroup component, make sure that it ungrouped. So now you'll see what happens since this is no longer a component. Let's say I want to change the name of this indicator, or not the name, the color rather of this indicator. If I change that to yellow, you'll see it changes to yellow throughout the entire repeat grid. So that's a problem. I don't necessarily want that behavior. So if I go ahead and I turn this back into a component, you'll see now they're all components. So now if I go to one of these rows or any number of these rows, let's just go to this first one, I guess, double click into this, I can change the color here. And because it's a component, now it's seeing it as an override to the component and it's not changing it throughout the entire repeat grid. So then I could do, you know, a similar thing where I'm building out, you know, sort of a health of my elements motif or something like that. If you find any, you know, any reason to do that. I mean, I use that type of thing for health indicators all the time, and so that was something that I ran into that was a little bit of a weirdness with Repetor Grid is if you want to change color, you can go in and change type easily enough. So you can see the type already assumes that you'll be wanting different type in each one of these lines, but for some reason when it comes to color, the color happens throughout. So you can see that color just behaves a little bit differently, and the workaround for being able to change color and have different colors in different in different rows or different columns, however you've used your repeat grid, the workaround for that is just to make it a component, and then you can double click into that component and create an override on those rows or columns where you want the color to be able to change. So anyway, like I said, Repeat Grid is one of my favorite tools in Adobe XD. I hope this was useful for you guys. I hope you learned something here. And like I said, there were two different ways to do this. I prefer the manual way that gives me a little more control over making sure that these female names get matched with female faces and male names get matched with male faces and that kind of thing. But the plugin's pretty cool too. I mean, whoever wrote this plugin, brilliant. I love it. So either way works, and either way will probably save you a ton of time. I prefer doing it the manual method because then I have something that's reusable that I can use in any of my mockups. So, again, hopefully that's useful to you guys, and I will see you on the next one.